I'm Elizabeth Leonard. I'm so thrilled to have you on another episode of Leadership and Productivity Podcast. Thank you for being a member of this community. Today, I have with me, and I am so honored to have these two women with me today, Erin and Michelle. And we are going to be discussing about a critical and important issue that happens between leaders or and their downliners. We could say managers and their downliners, employees. So the topic is leading through demand and control. I've seen a lot of questions and a lot of complaints by employees about having a leader who is always shouting or screaming or who is demanding respect. And in the process, leaders lose respect. And that's the irony of all of this thing. But I would cannot wait to hear the insight of these two experts that are here because they've got experience and I mean real life experiences, and they are here to help and support all of you. So I would like you to introduce yourself so that people can know, our audience can know what you're doing, and yes, what is special about you. Michelle, would you like to go first, please?
Sure. Thank you for that introduction. Well, my name is Michelle Thompson, and I'm a registered nurse turned healthcare consultant. I'm the CEO of my healthcare company called Curis Consulting. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada, with my husband and our two rescue dogs, Indy and Pepper, who I said I'm hoping nobody will hear in the background barking. And I support healthcare leaders who are ready to challenge the status quo and to lead authentically, who are heart centered and who are focused more on human connections rather than bottom lines.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's incredible. Erin, can you please share more about what you do? Can you
Yeah,
share?
sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. So my name is Erin O'Donoghue. I am calling in today from Melbourne in Australia. I am a coach, a facilitator, and consultant, and I also have my own business supporting individuals to design work lives that light them up. And I also do work consulting into organizations as well. So my background is in people and culture. I have spent my career working in organizations up until 3 years ago when I started my own business. And I have always worked in roles that are connected to people. So I have a background in leadership development, change, culture change, and then most recently in strategy and innovation. So I live with my partner and our daughter, who's 9 months old. So also too, I was saying, hopefully she's not going to be in the background, and our two dogs as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And thank you for sharing a lot about yourself. I am so excited to have both of you here. So now let's get down to the discussion. How do I someone asks a question, how do I deal with an indecisive but controlling boss? I know a lot of people have that issue with their bosses. Erin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I think, like you said before, unfortunately, this is not uncommon. Uh, and I think many people have experienced this in their lifetime. And I suppose so there's a few parts to this. I think the first thing that, I never learnt through my career when I was working in organizations, and I've probably only come to the realization fairly recently. So I don't know if it's something that is shared or taught more broadly now, but when someone has issues around control, it actually says more about them than it does about you.
Mm,
So I think the first thing is to just know that these are their issues. Now, of course, that's really easy to say in theory because, of course, their behavior has an impact on you. But I think I spent a lot of time worrying about these things when I did have controlling bosses, worrying what it meant about me, getting quite upset about it. The main thing is to, I guess, firstly, think about setting some boundaries for yourself. I think it's really, really important to do to not take on the emotions of this person. So I guess that's the first thing that I would say. This was about indecisiveness too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because often they can come hand in hand. Yeah. So I've experienced this in the past. I think look, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. It's really, really difficult because this is one of the reasons that I left organizations. So, and it can often lead people to lead organizations, lose respect for their managers. And so I think it's about setting boundaries, as I said, seeking advice from people, that whether it be from your HR team, whether it be from trusted colleagues. I think it's about getting really clear on what that person's expectations are of you. And sometimes you need to get things in writing. Like I can remember in my own experience, I used to just confirm things in writing. Like if we had a meeting, for example, I'd just jot down an email and say, just confirming we agreed this, and this. I'll get that to you by X date. So those were some of the strategies that I actually used myself as well. Yeah, those are probably the main things I think that come to head. I'm sure Michelle's got something else to add to that.
Yeah, Michelle, what do you have to say?
Yeah, well, I'm never short for words. I mean, I have the gift of gab. I come by that honestly. So, and you know, this is an area that's really dear to my heart because I have also experienced, as Erin has, some really dysfunctional and unsafe work environments. And so, you know, I think that I speak about this more from where I am now within my own business from a leadership perspective, and that's currently what I'm doing is I'm supporting healthcare leaders through an 8-week leadership program. And so we really talk about a lot of these factors. And one of the things is that, you know, and Erin touched on some of these topics that I'm going to repeat is that, you know, not all leaders learn how to lead correctly and lead well. And so, you know, my approach always and foremost is to you know, approach every situation with empathy. And that can be really difficult when you feel that you're being slighted or not treated well by somebody. And so it's really a muscle that you have to learn to flex as you know, stepping into a leadership role. And I think that we're all leaders. So whether you you know, feel that you are a leader or not, you are, because people will see how you behave in the workplace, and that will be the example then that will start to set the culture of the organization. And I believe that each of us have a responsibility for that. So you know, I think the first thing I always say to people is, you know, try to explore the situation with empathy, and try not to make assumptions. So, you know, try to meet people where they're at. This might be a manager that has always been micromanaged. They may not know any other way. And so, you know, they may just have not developed the skills to be able to lead well. And, you know, I find that a lot of managers who are micromanagers often also assume that if people are asking a lot of questions, it's because those people haven't yet developed the skills that they need to do their job well. When in fact, more likely, it's because those people have actually not been given the autonomy or the empowerment to make decisions. And so they're seeking the direction from their manager. And so the manager actually doesn't look internally to see that they haven't made it very clear to the people that are working on their team around what types of decisions they can make. And so when they're asking questions, it has nothing to do about competency or their capacity. It's really that they're seeking an opportunity to have their decision-making capabilities really outlined and to have that discussion. So that's kind of the first thing that I would say, you know, came to mind when I was thinking about this question. And, you know, I think that I've always tried to give advice, and some of the things that I've done is to try to, you know, just be autonomous and take the reins, so to speak. So, you know, if you feel that you're being micromanaged, that's difficult. But for me, indecisive is more difficult because I think when you have those two together, you're really left feeling like I'm being micromanaged. So they're being really controlling, but yet they're not making a decision. And it's this weird oxymoron to be in. And so what I found to be generally most productive for myself, and what I've recommended to others and got good feedback, is really kind of having a conversation with this individual and finding a time that, you know, feels right to sit down and have that conversation. And so, you know, I always try to approach every situation that is difficult, like, complex situations or difficult conversations using 3 steps. So the first one really is asking permission. So asking that person, do you have a minute? Or, are you open to some feedback? I'd really like to talk to you about something. And then, the second step is stating your concern. Here's what I want to talk to you about. Would you be open to me giving you some feedback? And then finally, the last stage is really sharing. So when you say this, or when you do this, this is how it makes me feel. So when you can do that, it's really not, it's not being aggressive in any way. And it's giving that person the opportunity to state their intention and to then really have a dialogue around what maybe the root problem is. And it may not be anything to do with the fact that they don't trust their workers or don't think that their performance is good. It just might be an awareness that they're actually not leading in an effective way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And Erin, you mentioned setting boundaries. Are there ways that you can suggest that someone can set a boundaries? I mean, the employee.
Yeah, and that was amazing, Michelle. Such good tips in there. I definitely think for me, boundaries are something that you need to be really clear first and foremost with yourself about what they are. So I think we can't set boundaries with other people if we aren't first clear on what our boundaries are with ourselves. So, our boundaries come into play around all sorts of things and experiences that we've had in our lives. And often they're things that we don't even realize. I know in the past I've had really, really loose boundaries about particular things, and I couldn't understand why, in inverted commas, people were treating me so badly in certain areas. And it was because I had really loose boundaries in those areas. So, for example, when it comes to things like if it's an emotional boundary or let's say it's a physical boundary, that might be easier kind of in a workplace kind of context to make it really simple. So if I have physical boundaries around, everybody has different comforts around personal space, how close somebody can come to us in the workplace in general. I need to be clear with myself that if someone's getting close to me, it's because I have an issue around my space. And I need to be comfortable in myself knowing that that's a thing for me, and then to be able to express it to them. So I loved what Michelle was saying about, coming at things from a position of empathy, first acknowledging that someone's not necessarily trying to impinge on your boundaries. It's they're not aware. So basically just saying, look, I've noticed that when we're talking to one another, you're standing a little close to me and it makes me feel uncomfortable. I was just wondering if, we could just take a little bit of a step back. So that's a really basic example. It absolutely comes down to emotional boundaries. It comes down to boundaries around time. And I think Michelle's example around how to have those conversations is a really, fantastic and would apply to anything.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so, Michelle, what would you suggest to an employee of a boss who is freak? And would you advise this person to leave or to change the boss? I know that a lot of people, well, some people try to change this situation, to change things, but that could reflect in different ways. But I like the way you said once you have a dialogue. But there's someone asking for a difficult boss who is controlling. What would you say to that employee? Is it to change jobs or to change things?
Yeah, this is a really difficult one. And I, I've really been thinking about how the words that I would use to really, in terms of, giving advice or having a conversation about this, because I think that this is a really difficult one. And so, for me, the way that I respond to this really in terms of my intention is really focused on my core values. And so, my core values are that I want to be transparent. I want to be honest and fair. I believe that everyone should be treated exactly the same. There are some really core values for me that that would drive this. And so, I think that often bad behavior that I see that has forced people to leave a job that they really love and are good employees would be managers that instill fear, where they make people feel that they're replaceable, or they always are the ones to have the loudest voice. They minimize other people, or they gaslight. If people are familiar with that term, they often will take credit of the work of people that report to them, so that they look great, but they never give the people that they work with credit for. And I think the biggest one for me is often that they will only see a lens through their own lived experience and through their perspective, and never make an effort to see the perspective of others. And for me, really, this is really bad leadership. And so it's about creating a legacy, I think. And when all of these factors come together, it creates a really psychologically unsafe work environment, which for me is, again, the core of my core values, and everything that I am striving to create and help leaders create is a psychologically safe workplace. And so I think that I would, say to someone, I think you have to take a personal look at how much does this job mean to you? Do you really love the work? Do you love the organization? And is this, a job that you need to have to support your family? Because, I would never want someone to leave and then not be able to, support their needs. However, I would say that the most important thing would always be to consider is your own mental health. Like, your own mental health has to be the most important factor here. And so often I see this in nurses who are really struggling with how they provide really good care, but they're doing it in a framework that doesn't allow them to do that. And what happens is it causes them a great deal of moral distress. And this easily translates into any other industry or sector, where when you feel like your core values are not in alignment with behaviors or things that you are seeing happen, it causes a lot of moral distress. And so that's why I always say you have to focus on your own mental health first, and then make that decision based on that, and how resilient you feel you are. I would say, I guess my advice, if there was something you could do, is if you were trying to be proactive, is that you could go back and look at the core values of the organization, and perhaps look at pointing out that they're not being honored, that this behavior is not honoring those core values. And so if you were then to approach your manager, the individual doing this behavior, it would be really to focus on the behavior, and not focus on that person being a bad person, but that the behavior is actually unprofessional. And then I think, to what Erin had said, is this is the place where I would say boundary setting is key. This is really where I think you need to set some really, clear boundaries on what is acceptable and not, in terms of I've heard a quote before, that we teach people how to treat us. So if you accept somebody speaking to you in a certain way multiple times, it reinforces that that's okay and that behavior is acceptable. And I think that, we have to be able to have a voice to stand up, not only for ourselves, but often for others, when we're seeing people that perhaps are being marginalized in the workplace and feel they don't have a voice, is to be able to have a voice. I heard a quote not long ago at a conference that's stuck with me. It really resonated with me. And it was, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was something to the effect of, the culture of an organization is founded by the worst behavior it's willing to tolerate. And so often when I'm working with organizations that are struggling, and they have, low employee engagement and low morale, and they're really struggling to come together and find the sweet spot as a team, I always ask them, I use that quote, and then I say, so what is the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate? As a group, collectively, what's the core and the shared value here? Like, what's the lowest denominator? And then we kind of work backwards from there. And I think that sometimes that helps people really understand, well, no, if we say we don't agree with bullying, and we don't agree with people, being gaslit in the workplace, and yet we're allowing this to happen, and we're doing nothing, then, how can we honor that in a better way?
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've really shed a lot of more light into this. And that's so good. I like the idea that you mentioned personal core values, and also looking into the organization's core value. That's an avenue for someone to address it, even if you think of changing things, not the person, but the behavior. It's a good thing to focus on. And I really appreciate everything you shared. Erin, is there anything you'd like to I know that Michelle has said a lot.
Yeah, that was amazing. I really think I also, for me, the core values piece is such an important one. I absolutely
Yeah.
agree with everything that you said, but I think it's really worth calling that out, your own personal values. And I suppose here, this is where I would add that it is such a fine line, because I completely agree with you, Michelle. It's so important to speak up for those that don't have a voice, and then bringing it back to that piece around your own mental health and finding that balance where if it's impacting your mental health to be
Mhm.
standing up for other people, sometimes you do have to put yourself first, because ultimately if you're not in a strong aligned position, your ability to help other people is probably not great. And I probably speak about this a little bit from personal experience too. My reasons for leaving my job, and one of the things I speak about in my journey, was not necessarily because of controlling, but because of a culture, an organizational culture, where I realized was just not aligned to me anymore. That exactly what you were talking about, Michelle, seeing those kinds of behaviors that I just wasn't comfortable with. And it was making me very unwell. My mental health was in a really bad position. I was frustrated about what was happening to me, but it was kind of putting it through the lens of what was happening to everybody else. And so it really just got to the point of complete overwhelm, where I really finally realized, it took a long time for me to realize, that my core values around honesty, around trust, around freedom sort of to make decisions. I was in quite a senior role, and there was some micromanagement. I guess there was definitely some ego stuff happening. So I definitely think that there does come a time where we have to acknowledge that if our core values are not aligned with the organizations, and not just the espoused values of the organization, but that lived culture that Michelle was just talking about, there does come a time where we have to acknowledge that, hang on, perhaps this isn't right for me. And, the realities of life that sit under that, like Michelle mentioned, around how much you need this job and those sorts of things, I would highly advise recognizing those signs early, so you can put things in place to not have to leave immediately,
Mhm.
to be able to work
That's right.
towards that. And of course, I'm not talking about this as a first step. This is just once
Mhm.
things get down a particular path and you realize that they're a little bit irreparable and that it's not good for you personally.
Right. Thank you so much. So when you mentioned the core values that do not align with honesty and trust, I just felt like, then what's left? Because those are huge and important, equally important. But then, well, I'm glad you're here and to also share the experience with people and telling your story on the journey so far. So
Yeah,
there's another one here. We say, when the rules of productivity of your company seem to be constantly changing due to an over controlling boss, what do you do when they keep changing rules because of the desire of that boss? Or I don't know if I should call that a desire for respect or something. Michelle, would you like to address that?
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, this is a hard one. I think that I spent a lot of time with healthcare professionals talking about time management and perceived workload, because nurses are typically pretty busy people, and healthcare leaders are generally pretty busy, and so I think that there's this what stuck out for me, which I think might some people might not initially see the connection, was when an organization is constantly changing priorities, sometimes that's perceived as not necessarily conducive to like good time management, a good use of people's time, where you're sort of spinning your wheels and you're never really going anywhere. And what I've noticed is that people who are really highly productive tend to master the skill of time management, which then really allows them to just add more work to their schedule. And so often it's really not an issue of how like what you're doing and how much of it you're doing. It's really around identifying the difference between something that is critical, like, or urgent, and then something that's important. And so what I thought about when I read this question was the matrix that Stephen Covey talks about in his book of I think it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I have it here on my bookshelf, but I'm not sure if that's exactly the title or not. And he talks about it's like a time management matrix, I think is what it's called. And he said often people get hung up on the difference between like things that are considered urgent and then things that are important. And often urgent things are not important, but important things should be urgent. And so I really think that the conversation really needs to start when you're talking about priorities is identifying what are the core priorities so that everybody is starting from the same point of view. And so, what are those core priorities? And then, you're focusing on those, and those are not going to waver. And, for me, I think that trust is often built by sharing information, and micromanagers often have a really hard time with that. And so, what I try to do is have conversations with those people regularly. So I let them know what I need. I want you to look really good, and I want to do really good work, but here's what I need from you in order to be able to do that. I need a weekly check-in. I need 30 minutes of your time once a week so that I can fill you in on what I'm doing, where I'm at, and get feedback from you. And you let me know whether you think I'm on the right track, or is there something I can do differently? And that often will also help with that first question that you had, where someone's really indecisive, because sometimes people get that analysis paralysis where they get so caught in their head and they're intuitive thinkers that they just can't make a decision. And often you can really help a manager move forward when you can give them options and they can see what you're doing, and then they can, try to navigate through that in that way. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let Erin share her feedback.
Yeah, Erin, thank you so much, Michelle. Erin?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of things that come to mind. I think, there's so much in there about productivity, and it's so important. I think there's a few things that come to mind for me. It's about, again, coming back to the fact that there are so many reasons why someone is controlling. Mm-hmm. So there are so many factors. So like I said before, it says more about them than it does about you. Yeah. But as we're talking, the thing that comes really to the forefront for me is what the culture of the organization is as well. So, there can be all sorts of things. They can be political, they can be ego driven, they can be positioning. So the reasons why priorities keep changing or productivity expectations keep changing could be because of a whole lot of other external factors as well. And often, particularly if we're in sort of lower level roles when we're first starting out in our careers, or even middle management roles, sometimes you're not completely aware of all of the things that are happening for that person. So I suppose the first thing to be aware of is it may be them, but it may also be these other factors that are happening around them as well. So I think, as Michelle mentioned, communication is key, and I think also going back to your point, Elizabeth, the problem is when these kind of things happen, relationships erode, respect gets lost. And so it can be quite difficult to have those conversations with this person when that frustration starts to creep in. But it is really important to try and keep those levels of communication open, managing your boundaries, and also managing your emotions. I know this is something that I haven't necessarily done particularly well in the past, and something that I learned and I'm still learning is really trying not to let your frustration show, but coming back to trying to have practical conversations around, yes, is this important work, or is this critical work, those sorts of things. So it really does come down to how you want to behave. That you are the only person that you can control in those situations. Your emotions, your reactions. And sometimes it means actually not having those conversations in the heat of the moment as well, and taking some time and space to actually step back and step away. I'm also a big fan of asking questions. So not making, which Michelle also said before, but asking questions to say, can you help me understand a little bit more about why this has changed? Or can you tell me more about what's going on that I might not be able to see in this situation? So those are some little tactical things that can potentially help to have these types of conversations.
Wow, thank you so much. And now, thank you. Thank you. Those are a lot of good informations that you've shared. And I'm sure our audience will find them useful. So now we are going to the end of this segment, which I have a few more questions for you, which I didn't tell you before, but these are personal questions. For instance, number one, what's your favorite drink?
It's Michelle. I am not proud to admit that I have an addiction to Diet Pepsi.
Oh, and why is that? Does it taste
I don't
differently?
know. I
Okay.
don't know. I know that I drank a lot of it when I was actually nursing in the hospital for years. It was the thing that kept me up between 2 and 4 when I worked in ICU, and
Okay.
I worked night shifts, and I didn't matter how much sleep I got between 2 and 4. It was just that time I always fought to stay awake. And I always remember cracking open a Diet Pepsi, and that would help me get through. And I don't know if it's some odd comfort thing, but at 50 years old, I am not proud to admit that it's a major food group for me.
Yeah, you don't really look your age. Maybe that's part of what is making you look good. I'm just joking.
Well, thank you.
Aaron, what's your favorite drink?
For me, it's a very, very close call between coffee
Okay.
and like a really good coffee. So where I'm from in Australia, we are renowned for our coffee, and we are coffee snobs. So it's got to be like a proper barista
Wow.
coffee. Or the other one is a very, very toss up is wine.
Okay.
I love a glass of wine at the end of the
Okay.
day.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I thought you were going to say water. And we
I would love to say water. It's so important.
yeah.
But, you know.
Another question for both of you is what's your favorite book? Your favorite book?
That is a hard. I always
Yeah.
struggle with these questions, but I would say one of the books that I read recently that really resonated for me was a book called Make Time.
Oh,
Um, and it's a book by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky, who worked in Silicon Valley for Google and invented things like Gmail and all of those sorts of things that were supposed to help us with our productivity, but have ended up in some ways taking over our lives. So they've got lots of great little strategies and suggestions about getting back more time in your day. And part of it is through managing our smart devices and using them more smartly and effectively. So I found that a really useful book because obviously, I think we all say we have less time than we ever have before. And it was just something really, the thing I loved about it was they both shared their unique kind of strategies and experiences. And so it wasn't a do this, then do that, then do this. They're like, this works for us. So you might like to try this, or you might like to try this. So I really loved that book.
that's really good. Michelle, what about you?
Well, thank you, Erin, for that. I'm gonna have to write that one down. I'm sitting right beside my bookcase, so I was able to grab it, and it's the Brene Brown Daring Greatly, and this one is really talking about vulnerability and how it transforms us in our, personal and work life. And I think probably one of the biggest concepts that I took from this entire book. I mean, I'm a Brene Brown junkie, and I just think so much of what she says is brilliant. But one of the things that really resonated with me that she talks about in this book is around when you are being vulnerable, that most people think that you need to have have trust, and then you are vulnerable. And she argues that being vulnerable actually builds trust, not the other way around. So a lot of people will only be vulnerable when they feel that they already have the trust of other people. And, she says that actually in groups, if you show vulnerability and you lead from a place of vulnerability, that will actually build trust faster because of that that factor that we all have, that, you know, we tend to like people that we know, like, and trust. And so it really kind of falls into that concept of, you know, when you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable and to be put in a position where you're saying, I don't know, or I need your help, that other people can look at that and say, I really value the fact that she was willing to put herself in that position, or he was willing to put himself in that position. So that's one of my faves.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
That's really good. I'm taking notes of those two books because I need to get them. So, just one last question. Do you have a favorite time of the day, and what time is it? It could be not, I don't intend to hear you tell me 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. You can say that, but you can just let us know if it's morning and why. Erin, would you like to go? Yeah.
Oh, this is actually a really good question. I've traditionally been a night owl. Sort of never really an early morning person, but that's changed recently. And I mentioned before, I have a 9-month-old daughter, and I think it's partly because I have to be up for her anyway. Fortunately, she's a pretty good sleeper, so we're very lucky. But I do find that, you know, right now it's morning here, and I do find that getting up in the morning and getting started with my day, going to bed a little bit earlier so I can wake up with a spring in my step, certainly getting in, and if I'm doing some work, getting to my computer early and setting myself up for the day definitely has become really helpful for me. So
Yeah.
I probably have to say, in a way that's surprising even to me, that I do enjoy that sort of morning time. And if I can get up before the world and my family gets up too, that sometimes is really good as well. But I think it's going with your energy as well. You know, some days getting up really early feels really good. And sometimes I just listen to my body and know that I need to take it a little bit slower. So yeah, I think it's depends on the day, but listening to your body is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. And thank you so much. What about you, Michelle?
Gosh, I'm feeling really torn because, like Erin, I'm a bit of a night hawk. I take after my grandmother that way. I sometimes I can get really in the zone of thinking at like 11 o'clock at night, um and I enjoy being in that kind of creative state. I also really enjoy the act of getting ready to go to bed. So those rituals that I have of taking my makeup off and kind of washing off the day and unwinding. I think though that I would say that personally, I sort of started on a journey, a personal journey of a deep dive into some self-reflection about 2 years ago. And uh, I think that for me now, the morning is really more a time that I savor, because it allows me, I try to be more mindful about setting intentions every day, and to be more, you know, before I used to wake up and my alarm would go off and I would sit in bed for half an hour and I would scroll through my phone and check emails and go on social media. And you kind of start your day already just being bombarded with all of that. And, you
Yeah.
know, if you see one bad thing or something awful that's happened in the world, it can really set the tone for the rest of your day. And so now when I wake up, I just kind of lay in bed for a few minutes and I'm very mindful about, you know, oh, the sun is shining today and I'm happy to be here and I had a pretty good sleep, and really trying to set the tone for how I'm going to approach the day and the things that I want to get done that day. It's not to say that I don't grab my phone, but I usually now, for at least the first 30 to 45 minutes, I make an intention to not pick up my phone and engage and really give myself that time to collect myself and get my energy flowing in a way that's going to be most productive for me for the day. And that's a new practice that's really hard. And if you asked me like 2 years ago, I would have probably given you a really inappropriate eye roll and said that's really woo woo and that's not me, because I'm very you know, driven around productivity and a lot of the things that we talked about today. And I've really learned through the experience that we've collectively had in the last year and a half, there's a lot more
Yeah.
to just being in the state
Mm-hmm.
rather than doing.
That's
And
true.
that's one for me that I constantly have to remind myself, it's not about doing all the things. Sometimes it's just about being.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And now we come to the end of this segment, and we appreciate all of you for being part of this community and waiting till the end. So we'll see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you.